Hey everybody, my name is James. This is my son Carson, and we love playing Pokemon and the community. And so I thought I would try to get back a little bit and talk about intentional draws because I know how stressful it can be when you're trying to tell your kid whether they should intentionally draw or not. I remember the first regional level event that we went to. It was a little bit different because it was the Anaheim Open and there was no bubble, but made things a little bit more confusing. It was our first event, and Carson actually had a shot at top cut, and he asked me, can I intentionally draw? And I looked at things, and I said, yeah, I think you're good. And he went and played, and then I took the standings to Connor Fenton, who, of everyone that I've ever looked at standings with, I think he is the fastest at determining whether you can safely intentionally draw or risky intentionally draw. And he says, he might not make it. And at that point, I was like, whoa, I've got to figure out how this all works. I have a math degree.
Nerd alert!
So I think if I just sit down and think about this, I can figure it out. And I think I've got it figured out. So I'm going to share that with you now. Here's everything we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the legality of intentionally drawing. We'll talk about Swiss Calc, a very useful tool from Limitless TCG. Now, this is not guaranteed. As a matter of fact, we're going to see in the example that we're going to look at, Swiss Calc did not project things correctly. Or I won't say they didn't project things correctly. We'll talk about it more when we talk about Swiss Calc. Then I'll show you the guaranteed method of determining whether you can 100% ID and be in top cut. And then we'll talk about risky IDs and like, should you take them, and kind of a little bit of the math behind. I'm not going to get too geeky on you guys, but and it can go well beyond the scope of what I'm going to talk about here. But I think you're going to find that my guaranteed method of determining whether you can intentionally draw is actually pretty simple. And if you haven't seen this Swiss Calc tool before, you're going to love it. But let's go ahead and first talk about the legality of can you ID or not. Now, this is from Pokemon.com, the tournament rule book. And right here, it says, if they wish, players may make a single offer. So you can only say this once, right? A single offer to concede to their opponent or to propose an intentional draw. So you can ask one time. I've seen multiple kids ID'd for continually asking their opponent, do you want to ID? Do you want to ID? Do you want to ID? That is grounds for DQ. So do not let your kid do that. One draw. Now, someone can say, no, I would not like to ID. And then later in the match, they can say, yes, now I would like to offer an intentional draw to you. And then you can accept that if you previously offered an ID and your opponent did not want to. Now maybe your opponent changes their mind and now they want ID and it's still good for you. So you say yes, that's perfectly valid, but you can only ask once. All right. The other thing that I want to point out here, because I see this rule broken all the time, especially in cups, it's kind of really hard to enforce, but it says once the match has begun, players may not refer to tournament standings. Okay, so you can obviously refer to tournament standings before the match has begun, but once it's begun, you can't refer to tournament standings or wait for another match in progress to resolve before making their decision to concede or agree to an intentional draw. Because a lot of times what will happen is if multiple tables need to play it out to guarantee themselves in, if one of those tables comes to a winner and a loser, so in other words, they don't tie naturally, then another table might be able to draw and get in. It's legal. Is it moral? I think it is. You know, you have to decide that to you because you earn your way for the right to ID in safely. Like if in most junior tournaments are 6 rounds of Swiss, if you start 4-0, you get to ID the next round and you're in. You're going to be in. So if you start 4-0 in a 6-round tournament, ID your 5th round, you're guaranteed in. No matter what else happens, I promise you, you're in. And that's a right that you earn by starting 4-0. It's not easy to start 4-0. And, you know, will you do it every time? Of course not. So when other people do it, they've earned the right. So I don't feel slighted in any way if some other kid starts 4-0 and IDs the next 2 rounds in. Good for them. They did a great job. They earned their right to ID in. But that's enough about that. Let's talk about this tool, Swiss Calc. So let me pull up the web browser here. I don't know if you're familiar with Limitless TCG, but it's an awesome resource for deck lists. They have great articles, but over here they have some awesome tools. First thing is a proxy printer. So we use this a lot when new sets are coming out. So check that out. And then Swiss Calc is an amazing tool. So it is just a tool though, because it is based on expectations. So I'm pretty sure how this thing works is, all right, well, let me tell you first how you use it. You key in the number of players. So we're going to work with Dallas of 2020, and there were 55 players in juniors at Dallas. I'm going to key in 55. Now, what it's doing is it's running a bunch of simulations, right? So that's why it needs to know what percentage of the players are tying each time. And so the default is 17%. Now, on the tournament standings, for Arcanine Labs, it'll show you at the top how many kids are tying each round. So you can update that. I don't think it's super important because, as I said, you don't want to use this as a 100% accurate. It's more just to get a general idea of things. So I usually just key in 10%. And now for juniors, there's not a day 2 Swiss, so you can go ahead and remove that. So all you want is enable intentional draws check, key in the number of players, key in a tie rate that you're comfortable with. 10% is fine. Click show standings. And then I'll scroll down here. And first of all, it's going to tell you some things about the tournament. It's going to say the tournament will consist of 6 rounds, followed by a top 8 cut. And it's 7.189 players are expected to have 13 points or better. Okay, so what they're saying is 13 points should be guaranteed to make top 8. As we're going to see for Dallas, 13 points was not guaranteed. 2 kids actually bubbled at 13 points. So as I said, this isn't guaranteed because what this does is it runs a bunch of simulations, and then it takes the average of how many people have 13 points or better. So on average, 7.189 players had 13 points or better, but there were certainly many scenarios where 9 or 10 kids had 13 points or better, and as we'll see for Dallas, that's what happened. 10 kids actually ended up with 13 points or better. So, and one of the reasons why is because there was some risky IDs in Dallas. So if we click enable risky IDs, we might get something a little bit different, but don't click this. Just click enable intentional draws, run the simulation, and you get this down here. So let me actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this to where I can write on this diagram. So let's copy this and we'll paste it over here where I can draw on the screen so that I can explain what these columns mean, okay? So first of all, the first column is the number of points, and that's match points. And I'm sure that you know that a win is 3 points and a tie is 1 point, okay? So if you finish with a record of 4 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie, so this is wins, losses, and ties, then you have 4 wins at 3 points each, so that's 12 points, 1 tie at 1 point, then you have 13 points, okay? And according to SwissCalc, with 55 players, you would expect it to be in top cut because that's what this column here means, cumulative players. Actually, don't even worry about this column here. It's not very useful. What you want to know is cumulative players. So what this SwissCalc is saying is they expect, let's just start with 18 points. They expect less than 1 person to have 18 points or higher. They expect less than 1 person to have 16 points or higher. So let's go to something meaningful like the 7.189. So they're saying they expect 7.189, or if you want to round up, 8 players to have 13 points or higher. So according to this, SwissCalc, they're saying 13 points is guaranteed for top 8. And 12 points would be guaranteed for top 16 because less than 16 players have 12 points or higher. Actually, 11 points would also be guaranteed. So this is saying top 8 would fall at 13 points or above. Top 11, and maybe even 1 person at 12 points might bubble into top 8, depending on how things fall out. And at 11 points, top 16 would be guaranteed, and maybe 1 person will bubble in at 10 points. Okay, so that's how you want to read this. So you're going to look for, around the 8, around the 16, around the 32. So again, here at 9 points, top 32 would be guaranteed. And maybe 1 kid will bubble in with 8 points into top 32. So that's this tool, okay? And for this reason, you can definitely use this in earlier rounds. So you know that if you start 4-0, right, and you ID, then you're already at 13 points, then you're probably you're going to be in because you won so much early, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, is resistance. If you win a lot early, then you face better opponents quicker, and so they're more likely, now it's not guaranteed, they're more likely to do better, and therefore your resistance will be better, okay? So if you start 4-0, you're safe to ID. This is also useful if you're like stipend chasing or you just want prizing, like you don't even care about the CP, but you want to like guarantee yourself top 16, then you might be at like a record of 3 and, or you might be a record of, let's say you're at a record of 4 and 1, and you might, as you'll see later, we might figure out that you're not guaranteed to be in if you ID, but you are guaranteed to be in top 16 if you ID, okay? And so maybe you just want to guarantee yourself top 16 because you're out ahead of a stipend race, and you just top 16 points will almost secure your stipend, and so you decide that you want to take a top 16 guarantee with a shot at top 8. But well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So this is the Swisscalc tool. Play around with it some. If you have any questions, come up to me at Regional. I'll try my best, or post on PokeDad's Facebook page, and I'll try my best to answer. But let's talk about how can you determine for certainty that you're in top 8 with an ID, okay? The way that you do this is with the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario. So what you're going to do is you're going to figure out what your point total would be if you ID, and then you're going to look at each match and determine what's the worst case scenario for you from that match. So this is one of the big problems that people do when they get overwhelmed and they start saying, well, what happens if these people tie, or if Donovan wins, or if Megan wins, or if these people tie, and they just try to consider too many scenarios. But if you're just looking to whether you're guaranteed, all you have to do is look at the worst case scenario. So let's start really simple. Let's start, this is my son here, Carson. So going into round 6, so this is the pairings posted right before the last round. So we don't have the results of the last round in this picture here. So Carson is currently sitting at 4 wins and 1 tie. So that is 13 points, okay? So if he IDs, right, so 13 points for, this is from rounds 1 to 5. Then for round 6, if he IDs, that's another point, giving him 14 points, okay? So that'll be his point total at the end of the Swiss rounds, right? So now all we have to do is look at the rest of the meaningful matchups and determine the worst case scenario for him. Now, the worst case is somebody, more people reaching 14 points or higher, okay? So in this case, Donovan and Megan are both also at 13 points, right? So the worst case scenario here is that they ID, or that they ID or naturally tie. Because if they play this out and one of them wins, only one person will be at 14 points. But if they ID or tie, then they're both in. They're both at 14 points. So again, the worst case scenario for Carson, if he IDs this round, right, to getting to 14 points, then the worst case scenario is a tie. So Donovan would be at 14 points, Megan would be at 14 points. So that's 2 people. By the way, also, clearly if they ID here, then Nathan is also at 14 points, right? Because we're assuming an ID here. So Nathan is at 14 points. So what we're doing is we're counting the number of people that are at 14 points or higher, right, under the worst case scenario for each match. So Camille and Lucas, if they ID as well, right, then they're currently at 12 points each. So them IDing is 13 points, right, which is less than 14. So that's not the worst case scenario for this match. For this match, the worst case scenario was a tie. But for this match, a tie is great for Carson because he's at 14 points, and that'll put Camille and Lucas at 13 points. So the worst case scenario for this one is a win in either direction. So let's say Camille wins. Then now Camille is at 5-1, which is 15 points. Okay, so that's the worst case scenario. And now down here, again, basically all of these below is no longer going to be a tie because all of these points are, all these times, everyone is starting with less than 13 points. So every one of these, it's going to be if somebody wins, right? So now if this person wins, then this person will be at 4-1-1, which is 13 points, right? And here, this person will be at 4-1-1, so this is 13 points, right? And then this will be, if someone wins, this is 13 points. And then these people, if someone wins, this is 12 points, okay? So no matter the worst case scenario, at most there's going to be Carson, that's 1, right? So we're counting now. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At most, there's going to be 5 people with 14 points or higher. Therefore, Carson can ID, and with 100% certainty, no matter what happens in all of these other matches, he will be in. So it makes no sense for Carson and Nathan to play this out, because if they play it out and they get down to 13 points, and as we can see from here, it's possible that they don't make top 8, right? So they would be crazy to play it out. And this is why I don't think it's morally wrong to play it out, because Carson and Nathan, by starting 4-0-1, have earned the right to ID and make it into top cut. Okay, so that was the easy one. So let's look at, so obviously if that's the case for Carson at 4-0-1, it's going to be the same case for Nathan, Megan, Donovan, and Megan as well. All these 4 people. Okay, so let's look at Camille. Okay, let's look at Camille. So Camille is now at 12 points. Okay, so Camille is at 12 points, right? So 12 points currently from rounds 1 through 5. And for round 6, if he IDs, he gets 1 more point, and he gets 13 points. Okay, so he'll be at 13 if he IDs here. He'll be at 13 points. He'll be at 13 points. And now we have to look at every match, right, and determine the worst case scenario for Camille. The worst case scenario is more people getting at 13 points or more, okay? These guys are already at 13 points. So no matter what happens, these guys are going to be at 13 points or more, right? So even if they play this out, all 4 of these people are going to be at 13 points or more, right? So no matter what happens, these are going to be at 13 plus points, 13 plus points, 13 plus points, 13 plus points. If they play it out, Nathan wins, then he is at 5-0-1, which is 16 points, and Carson loses, he's still at 13 points, right? So he's still at 13 points. So win, draw, tie, no matter what, all these people are going to be at 13 plus points, right? So every scenario for these table 1 and 2 is a worst case scenario for Camille. I'm sorry. I had these records wrong. I knew that didn't make sense. Sorry, going into this round, William was 4-1 and Johan was 4-1. So this was showing me the record after the results had happened. So this is what it looks like, and I had to back off. And these people tied on purpose, right? They ID'd. So actually their record was 4-1 going in. So sorry, this guy was 4-1. Johan and William were both 4-1. So let's go over that again. Sorry, let's back it up. So we're looking at this match, and the worst case scenario for Camille. We're doing this for Camille now, right? So if I'm Camille's parent and I'm trying to figure out whether they can ID or not, then William and Johan are already at 12 points each. And so if they play to a winner, that's good for Camille, because only one person gets 13 or more points. So the worst case scenario for Camille is that they tie. So if they tie, worst case scenario is they tie, then William will be at 13 and Johan will be at 13. Okay, so now we'll get down to the next one. And I think I had these records right. So let's see. Yeah, okay. So we're good here. So now, this particular case, if Connor and Angus tie, then they'll be at 3-1-2 each, which will be, let's see, 3-1-2 is 9 plus 2 or 11 points. So there'd be 11 points each, which would be less than 13. So that's not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is that one of these 2 players wins. So if Connor wins, then he'll be at 4-1-1, which is 13 points. And same exact idea for down here between Mia and Isaac. If one of them win, then they'll be at 13 points in a tie. So now, if we look at the worst case scenarios, we're counting the number of people at 13 points or higher. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so we actually have 10 players at 13 plus points. So that means that Camille cannot ID and be certain that he is in. Because if this scenario happens, which by the way is exactly the scenario that happened, as we see here that Connor and Mia won, then we end up with 10 players at 13 plus points, and it comes down to the dreaded resistance. Okay? So that's the worst case. That's the worst case scenario method. Again, just to explain it again one more time, is you count your total number of points, assuming you ID. So in this Camille's case, that's 13 points. Then look at each match and determine the worst case scenario. The worst case being it puts as many people as possible at your point total or higher. Count up those number of people. And then if that is, 8 or less, then you're in. If it's more than 8, then you're not in for certain. You're not in for certain. Okay, so that brings us to risky IDs, because we know on guaranteed that these people ID'd and these people ID'd, because they're guaranteed. No matter what happens, they're in. Okay, they're in. But it turned out that these two groups also ID'd. They also ID'd even though they weren't guaranteed. Was that smart of them to do that? In my opinion, yes. My opinion, yes. The reason why is because let's kind of think about what happens when there are 10 players and they're only taking 8. They do it based on your resistance. Now, your resistance is just an average of all of your opponent's winning percentage. It doesn't matter who you beat. I know a lot of times, kids come up to me and they say, I don't understand. I bubbled out, but 2 players made it in and I beat both of those players, so they had the same record and I should have been in because I beat them and they had the same record as me. Well, that's a circular reasoning. That's like a circular argument that can happen, because they might have beat 2 players that are also in, and if they were out, then those players, shouldn't have been in. And so you can get this scenario. So it doesn't matter who you beat or who you lost to. All that matters is who you played. Who you played and what was the average winning percentage of all of your opponents, okay? So why am I saying that it's not a bad idea for Camille, for example, to ID here? Well, one reason is that we know from this round, Camille is going to help his resistance more than, say, Connor is. Because what happens, Connor has to play it out. He has to play it out, right? Because he can't get to, I didn't go through Connor, but Connor has to play it out. There's no way, that should be pretty clear, but Connor has to play it out. He has to get to 4-1-1 to have a shot. And so by him playing it out, if he wins and gets to 4-1-1, then that means his opponent that he's playing this round will be 3-2-1, right? Whereas Camille, when he IDs with Lucas, Lucas is going to go to 4-1-1. And so now when we're comparing Lucas to Angus, one of the opponents we already know is immediately better. Lucas's record is better than Angus's record, right? So that's a plus in the case for Camille compared to Connor for resistance. Now, it's not guaranteed, because it could be that the people that Connor beat early on, like maybe Connor beat somebody the very first round, and then that person went on to do really well. If that person went on to do really well, then that's going to help Connor's resistance a lot. Whereas Camille's first round opponent may have went on to do very poorly, even though if Camille beat them in the first round, okay? So it's not guaranteed, but we do have one data point immediately where we know that if I'm IDing against someone else that's 4-1, then I know that Lucas's is going to help my resistance more than Angus is going to help Connor's. The other reason why I still think Camille should ID is because from our analysis, we know the worst case scenario is that 10 players are going to be at 13 points or higher. We know these 4 are guaranteed, right? Because they're going to be at more than 13 points after they ID. So that's going to leave 6 spots, right? Or excuse me, that's going to leave 4 spots and 6 players. So if these 2 come to a winner, so if somebody wins and somebody wins, then we're going to have 6 players. We're going to have 6 players and 4 spots. So even if it was completely random and not based on resistance, then Camille would have a 4 out of 6 chance of making top 8, right? Even if it was completely random. And we've already established that it's not completely random. We know one data point is already better. Also, Camille can look at his pairings page and see how his opponents are doing. If his opponents have been doing really poorly, his early round opponents have been doing really poorly, then he might not want to ID here. He might want to play it out. Also, this was the worst case scenario, right? This is the worst case scenario. If if either one of these matches or both of these matches play to a tie naturally, so if this match ends in a tie and this match ends in a tie, then these 8 are guaranteed in, right? So another scenario that could happen is we have a tie, and then Kamil IDing would be in. If one of these matches ends in a tie, one of these 2 matches end in a tie, then we'll have 5 players in 4 spots. And so even randomly, he would have a 4 out of 5 chance of making it in. But if you play and lose, then you're for sure out. So let's say that Kamil feels like, based on his matchup against Lucas, let's say that he feels like it's a 50-50 matchup. If he feels like it's a 50-50 matchup, by playing it, he has a 50% chance of not being in top 8, right? And a 50% chance of being in top 8. Sorry about my handwriting here. But if he IDs, even if it's completely random, he has a 4 out of 6. Under the worst case scenario, he has a 4 out of 6 or a 60, I think that's 2/3, 67% chance of being in top 8, and a 33% chance of being not in top 8. And for some reason, I wrote those in a different order. So these compare, we compare these two, and we compare these two. So by IDing, under the worst case scenario, he's got at least a 67% chance of being in top 8. Okay, so I think this was a very smart ID on both of these groups' part. Now, if you had a matchup where you felt like you were maybe an 80-20 or something like that, then maybe it would be worth playing. So that's where, watching what other kids play, knowing your matchups, might decide whether you would want to ID or to play it out. Yeah, that's basically, I know it got a little bit confusing there at the end, but hopefully that helps some of you guys in deciding whether you want to ID or not. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. I'll do my best to try to answer it. And yeah, best of luck in your future tournaments.